It's incredible. Well, we're looking at the Word of God today, and God has put in here some incredible things for us, and we've been moving our way through the Psalms and looking at the specific 13 Psalms that have a historical background. So we call it David Outside In. So we're going to see the outside of his life. We're going to read in the narrative section first, find out the context. Then we'll go to the inside of his life and see the song that he wrote in the Psalm, because the Psalms means songs. So they're actually songs that were, and today's song actually, I was trying to think, it is the equivalent, it was used in Israel as the equivalent of how we would think of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is kind of militaristic, sort of, you know. And so this song was used for that. It was used actually, many people think in when you were training soldiers in Israel, they would sing this song while they're doing the training. Oh, so it's got an interesting history to it. So let's take a look. We're going to look at the past that this song came out of, and we find it in 2 Samuel. We know that because at the beginning of this psalm it says, for the choir director, according to Shushan Udith, a miktam of David to teach when he struggled with Aram Naharim and with Aram Zobah, and Joab returned and smote 12,000 of Edom in the Valley of Salt. Now that's got a lot of clues in it. So what's that? A lot of information. Yeah, so they want us to specifically know what this came out of. This one's a really big deal. And if you're looking at those names and saying, Aram Naharim and Aram Zobah, who are those guys? We'll find out in just a second, okay? And Joab, who is he? I'll tell you who Joab is, because we won't talk too much about him. When David was made king, and this is the first psalm we have that we know he did when he was made king, he has generals in charge of his army. Joab was the chief. He was the big dude. So this guy is the 4-star general. And Joab has a brother who will also show up in the story we'll see in a second. He was the 3-star general in that sense. So this is a general of the army. So when he struggled with these guys. Now if you go up to the top, it says, it's according to Shushan Udith. And in case you're casting about for names of babies, there's 2 good ones right there. Shushan Eduth. Shushan Eduth. I always say it backwards. Shushan Eduth. Which has some connection in Hebrew to lilies. So it's like the lily song. I don't know why they made a military song with lilies. It's a lily song. That's the melody. And it's a miktam, which means a lyrical song to teach. So this song was intended to teach people in Israel about how God interacts with Israel when it comes to militaristic stuff. It's a teaching song. It's a teaching song. So that's what we're going to look at and find out what all this stuff is. By the way, take a guess. Valley of Salt is where? Valley of Salt, Valley of Salt, Valley of Salt. Salt Lake is a good choice. Yeah. Actually, yes, not Tooele. It's south of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is in this kind of this deep a slot of ground that's well below sea level. I don't know how far, 2,000 feet below sea level? I forget. Scott, do you remember Dead Sea, 2,000 feet below sea level? I forget. 15 or 1,700 feet, but it's low. But there's a slot that kind of looks like someone dragged a gigantic knife through the land and it left the Dead Sea. And it continues to go south. And as it goes south, it's the dried up part of the Dead Sea, so it's the Valley of Salt. So that's where we're going to look at today, so the Valley of Salt. Okay, so let's find out some more. If you turn to 2 Samuel 8, we'll go there and we'll try and figure out what this came out of. Now, as a recap, if you're just getting with us, last week we were at En-Gedi, and we wondered whether it has any connection to the word Serengeti. Tito says no. Serengeti is something completely different. En-Gedi means the spring of the goats is what it means here. And that's where we left David last week, as he was running away from Saul because Saul was still king and he was chasing after David because he was jealous of his popularity and his ability to fight. And so he was an enemy of the King Saul. And David was holed up here in En-Gedi. But since last week when we were in En-Gedi, and we saw the springs and the goats and the incredible drama that occurred when David stepped out of the cave and had this outside conversation with the king who was coming after him. Since that time, as we fast forward today, King Saul is killed in battle. So Saul is no more. Saul and his son Jonathan are killed, and they're killed in battle with the Philistines. So the Philistines continue to be a threat. That happens in 1 Samuel 31. David is immediately made king over just one tribe, the tribe of Judah, which is David's tribe. That's one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's made king over Judah. And a civil war starts immediately after that because Saul's son, Ishbosheth, is still alive. And remember I talked about last week, when a king dies, usually it's tradition for the son, the oldest son of the king, to become the king. Well, Ishbosheth doesn't want to become king. You can read about it. But the generals push him forward. say, you become king. So a civil war happens between David, who's in charge of the tribe of Judah, and Ishbosheth, who's in charge of the rest of the country, and the civil war ensues, and it's really very bloody and unnecessary, it turns out. Eventually, Ishbosheth is murdered, and that brings the civil war to an end. David then is made king over all the tribes of Israel in 2 Samuel 5. All the 12 tribes now see him as king. And the ark, remember the ark that Moses made popular, and also the Raiders of the Lost Ark? Yeah, that ark. That's brought back into Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6. God has an incredible discussion with David in 2 Samuel 7. If you've never read it, read it, because this is the new king sitting there, and he and God talk about what's going to happen with the nation of Israel and with the house of David in 2 Samuel 7. And then in 2 Samuel 8, where we are today, David goes about establishing the borders of the nation of Israel. So he's going to use his military might to kind of make things good around the edges of Israel, because actually, during the time of Saul, his predecessor, things have kind of gone to pot. It turns out that Saul was more concerned and more obsessed with chasing after David with his armies than he was protecting the boundaries of Israel. So now, David, one of the first things he does as king is he mops up the boundaries of Israel militaristically. And that's what we're going to look at. That's a context of today's psalm. So let's take a look at that. Here's a picture from the sky of present-day Israel. And right in the center there, this is the Dead Sea right here. By the way, there's a land bridge that now has connected to the right and left side of the Dead Sea. I don't know if you knew that. Ages ago, that wasn't the case. But now you can actually go from Jordan to Israel via dry land, which is a new thing. This red thing is the West Bank line. Theoretically, that was the 1967 boundary. If you heard of Golan Heights, which we're going to be in today, that's right up here near by the Sea of Galilee. And a funny thing, too, this line right here that goes from the Gaza Strip, there's the Gaza Strip on the Mediterranean, right down to here. This line right here, you can actually see that geographic line, that political line from space, because Israel has done a bunch of irrigation in the area, and you'll see green. If I took the yellow line off, in fact, I think I take it off right here. You can still see a faint line of that right here, because they've irrigated through here. So there's Israel. So let me use this as a map for what's going to happen here. This is where Israel is. Almost everyone agrees Israel has shrunk to during the time of Saul. It's kind of contracted in on itself. And this green area is the Philistines. And they have encroached in from the sea. They've come up to the hills where Israel is. They've even come around the top of Israel. And we know this because this little area right here, this point at the top where the yellow meets the green, is where Saul was killed by the Philistines. So they've come way inland, and they've started to come around the top of Israel. And that's notable because the most vulnerable direction to conquer Israel from that time to this very day today is from the north. It's from the north. In fact, Jerusalem is on a funny little lobe of a hillside. Jerusalem you cannot attack from the south or from the east or from the west because of the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley and where they meet at the bottom. You can't do that. But from the north, they're a pushover. So this is a big dangerous thing that the Philistines have now done an end round or coming down the top of Israel. And this is likely what we think it looked like at the time that David took over as king and Saul's gone. So it starts off in 2 Samuel 8, verse 1. Now after this, it came about that David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And David took control of the chief city from the hand of the Philistines. And the Philistines' chief city is the capital of Gath. I almost said it. It's Gath. Right, that's the hometown of Goliath. So they've taken over that. So they've really routed the Philistines and pushed them back toward the sea and taken over what is really classically the strongest part of Israel, all the way to the sea, to the Mediterranean. Where the Philistines went, we don't know, but they're kind of scattered, and David has pushed them out of the way. Next, verse 2, he defeats Moab and measured them with the line, making them lie down on the ground. And he measured 2 lines to put to death and 1 full line to keep alive. And the Moabites became servants to David, bringing tribute. What's this 2 line and 1 line thing? Well, it's actually under a lot of debate. But it looks as though David made an example of a bunch of Moab people and made some of them lie down and killed them and kept others alive. But the result, and we don't know much beyond that, it turns out. We just don't know. But the result of that, which is most important, is that the Moabites, people who lived in Moab, became servants of David. They respected David's leadership in the area. Now, where's Moab? Moab's down here. It's from the southern half of the Dead Sea and south and around the Dead Sea. Many people think that Moab actually took advantage of Saul's lack of attention, and they pushed onto the western side of the Dead Sea and started coming up on the backside of Israel. So the speculation is that David responded and pushed them back to this area, and that area you see that's just east of the lower half of the Dead Sea, that's classic Moab. Even to this very day, that's classic Moab. Not Utah Moab. Israel Moab, right? Got to clarify that. Also, it's a protected area in a way. If you go back to Deuteronomy, we read in Deuteronomy 2:9, the Lord said to Moses, do not harass Moab, nor provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession, because I have given Ar to the sons of Lot as a possession. So here, this region down here, God has said, just leave these guys alone. And even if you take over the land, I haven't given that to you. God says, I haven't given that to you, so don't you go out trying to take it. And this sets up a really strong theme throughout all of this, is that the land that Israel enjoys is not the land they conquer, it's the land God gives them. So he's saying, don't go trying to conquer Moab, okay? Don't do it. Verse 3, then David defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah. Other good names for children, just in case you're looking. As he went to restore Israel at the river. It'll take us a few minutes to unwrap this one. He went and defeated Hadadezer, that's the king's name, the son of Rehob, that's his dad's name, king of Zobah, that's the region, as he went to restore his rule at the river. Well, the clue here is the river. What is the river? No, and that's what I thought. Hadadezer is the king of Zobah, which is far to the north. And as you look, what David does is he goes to the north end of his kingdom and starts to push up north, and he bumps into the bottom side of Zobah. Zobah is a region roughly here that goes from present-day lower Lebanon and then all the way up to this river up here, which is the Euphrates. So what's going on is that Hadadezer, the king of the red Zobah region right here, I love these words, aren't these cool? He decides what the king of Zobah, what he decides to do is he decides to go up and make his kingdom stronger to the north, all the way up to the Euphrates River, which means that he's moved all of his military might up to the north, which means his military might is not down at the south that borders Israel. So it makes more sense when you read right here. Oh, let me just show you first. Damascus is about there, and a city by the name of Hamath is up there. Both of those cities exist today. Damascus today is called Damascus. 3,000 years later, it's still called Damascus. Hamath is called, take out the T, Hamah, H-A-M-A-H. It's still there today. No, that's not where Hamas is, but it's also a gigantic city in the Syrian area up there. So Hamas up there. Those are still there. So Zola is there, and the king, Hadadezer, there he is, he decides to go up and take care of his business up to the north. And David decides that while he's moved a bunch of his troops to the north, this is a great time to push him out of our region in the south. And so that's exactly what he does. That's what he does. And he defeats Hadadezer in the south because Hadadezer's most of his troops are up in the north anyway. And that's where they're up there. So David captures from him 1,700 horsemen, 20,000 foot soldiers, and David hamstrings the chariot horses, but reserved enough of them for 100 chariots. So that's the spoil that he gets from all of this, from Zobah. So it's a pretty good victory. Things look like they're going really well. And Zobah, probably, where are they now? Probably they're up further north and pushed away from the northern end of Israel. But it's very clear here that strategically David has taken advantage of the fact that Hadadezer, his attention and his power is moved up north. So he's weak in the south. And so he pushes him up and gets him out of the way where Israel's supposed to be. And that's what's going on here. That's an important point we'll come back to later. Now, Damascus is still there, and Damascus and Hamath both are very, very well entrenched city-states as a way. I mean, they've got, like Jericho, they've got huge walls around them, and they've got kings in charge of just the city. In that time, they didn't call them mayors, they called them kings. And so they're still holding out. So the story continues to move on as this battle rages. Verse 5, when the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 Arameans. So Aram is that general region that you see there to the right of Damascus. It's even can be used in terms of everybody that's to the right up there. They're Aramites, Aram. Well, the guys inside the walled city come out and decide to help Hadadezer, and it's a bad idea because they lose to the tune of 22,000 people. Extraordinary, just extraordinary. Kills 22,000 Arameans. That's still not what the psalm today is about. Verse 6, then David put garrisons among the Arameans of Damascus. That's a way to kind of watch the land and keep the bad guys out. And the Arameans became servants to David, bringing tribute. That means they paid taxes. They said, if we give you stuff, will you not hurt us? And that's what they did. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. The Lord helped David wherever he went. David took the shields of gold which were carried by the servants of Hadadezer, brought them to Jerusalem, and from Betah and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took a very large amount of bronze, which was a great military medal, by the way. But what's interesting here, and the writer of 2 Samuel is trying to be very clear, many times when a king conquers another people, he enriches his own pocket, the king, makes his house more rich. But what David does, to his credit, is he takes the gold that was actually on the shields of these guys, melts it down, and brings it to Jerusalem. And we'll see in just a second, so that he can give it to God and not line his pockets with it. Very big deal here. Okay, so the battle rages. How about this city in the north, Hamath? Another fortified city, because the name Hamath itself means like citadel or fortress. So, and it's perched right on a river, small river up there. So one side of it was completely impossible to get at because of the river. But it was a walled-in tough nut to crack. You couldn't get there. So what do they do? Well, after Damascus sends 22,000 out to die, the guys who are the king in Hamath go, I have a better idea. So what they do instead is this. Verse 9. When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated all the army of Hadadezer, Toi sent Joram, his son, to King David to greet him and bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him, for Hadadezer had been at war with Toi. So the king of Hamath already had a problem with Hadadezer. They were fighting already, so they decided to make peace. So Joram the son brought with him articles of silver, of gold, and of bronze. So they say, if we give this stuff to you, we will respect you and you won't hurt us? Yes. Okay, so there's peace there with those guys. They decide not to lose 22,000 soldiers. King David dedicates these to the Lord. See, he gives it to the Lord, not puts it in his own pocket, with the silver and the gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued, from Aram, that's the region to the upper right, and Moab, the region to the bottom right, beneath to the right of the Dead Sea, and the sons of Ammon, and the Philistines, and Amalek, these are other tribes that they fought, and from the spoil of Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. There will be a quiz in 5 minutes about all these names. The king of Hamath is Toi. Never mind. Okay, so the point here is, he says, David brings all these spoils and gives them to God. Gives them to God. Now, you got to take a second here and say, why would he do that? I mean, he's bringing in tons of booty, tons of spoil. Why isn't he lining his pockets? That's what every king does. Every king does. Every king says, if I'm going to put out and I'm going to threaten all of my troops and send them out there and go through all the hassle of all this fighting and not get anything in return to line my pockets, what's the point? Right? That's what everyone would say. Well, the reason why David doesn't line his pockets is because he already knows that the battle is not his, it's the Lord's. So any spoils or booty that comes from these belongs to God. It doesn't belong to him, because he's just the prince ruler in the sense of Israel. He's the shepherd for the great owner of the sheep, and the battles are God's and not his own. So that's why he says, well, I don't own any of this gold. I don't own any of this silver. I don't own any of this bronze. This is all God's, because God won the battle. God was with him everywhere he went. Well, we're still not to the psalm yet. I'll move on a little bit more. Verse 13, 2 Samuel 8. So David made a name for himself when he returned from killing 18,000 Arameans in the Valley of Salt. The Valley of Salt. So now we're getting close to the psalm, the Valley of Salt. And where's the Valley of Salt? Down here. And now we have a problem, because Aram is up here. It's, present-day Syria, this entire region up here. So how is it that the Arameans were fighting down here in the Valley of Salt? And in fact, we have another little conflict. There's a parallel historic account of all of this that we've been reading in another place, and that other place is in 1 Chronicles. You go to 1 Chronicles 18:12, and it says, moreover, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, defeated 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. Eh? And remember, the heading to our psalm attributed the Valley of Salt victory to Joab. I'm really confused. You don't have to be too confused. Edomites are down here. So it makes sense that if this battle was going to rage south of the Dead Sea, it would be down there, because the Edomites were the guys who lived east of that valley over there. So that sort of makes sense. But why Abishai? Who's Abishai and who's Zeruiah? Well, the mother of Abishai is Zeruiah, and the mother of Joab, the 4-star general, is Zeruiah. So Joab and Abishai are brothers. And one of them is the 4-star general, one's a 3-star general. They both work for David. So in a sense, when you say there's a victory down there in the Valley of Salt, yes, David had the victory because he was king, but Joab is the top general and Abishai is his under general. So it probably was the fact that Abishai's troops are the ones that did this down there. Okay? Also, there's an interesting, so why does it say in our account in 2 Samuel 8, it says the Arameans? Well, there's a lot of debate about this. And your historical eyes are probably rolling up in your head. But here's one explanation which is kind of interesting. The word Aram and Edom in Hebrew look very much the same, and there they are. They look really much the same. The middle letter, resh, is the R sound in Hebrew, so you get that little X-y thing is actually a glottal stop that starts with right? Adam's apple, that's the sound right there. And then there's the middle consonant, and the last one is the M sound. So we know it's something, Well, one of them looks like Aram. The other one looks like Edom. So that's possibly, it could very much have just been a scribal error when they say Arameans here. But almost everyone agrees that the battle, since it was in the Valley of Salt, has to be down here. It had to be Edomites, not Aramites. So Edom means red. Yeah, Edom means red. And it was a nickname for Esau, who had red hair. And Esau's descendants all went to Edom. So they're actually descendants of Esau. Jacob and Esau. There's history all over the place here. So yeah, these are all Esau's. So this is what's going on. There's a great killing down here. Now, this presents an interesting strategic problem. I can't remember where I go to next. Yeah, here it is. Here's the strategic problem. While David has taken all of his troops up to the north to fight Hadadezer and all the city-states of Damascus and Hamath, and moved all that military might to the north, a traditional enemy to the south takes up and starts to say, gee, David's moved all his troops to the north. He's vulnerable. Let's attack him from the south. Does that ring any bells? Yeah. David's strategy that he was using with Hadadezer, because Hadadezer went up to the Euphrates River, Edom is using against David. And so now you have this conflict in the south. They're coming in very close to home. And he still has this conflict up in the north, up with all of these guys. And so at this point, this is where David freaks out, because he's moved all of his power to the north, and the Edomites are going to come up and just swallow up Israel. And everyone agrees this is the actual point of the stress of his life, that the king of Israel, David, writes Psalm 60 today. Because he realizes that being really smart and clever and attacking the south end of Hadadezer, it wasn't really that smart and clever, because Edom used the same strategy against him. And now he's stuck. Now he's stuck. The only thing he can do at this point is to move his troops from the north and bring them down to return. And so actually you will see in the heading of the psalm, it says Joab returns. We'll see in just a second. He returns from the north and comes south. Right here he says David made a name for himself when he returned. And actually it's more attributing not to returning from the battle, but returning from the north. So everyone agrees this is about him suddenly running to the south. So the question is, in David's mind, will we be able to get there soon enough that the nation of Israel won't be gobbled up by Edom because of the foolish thing I did going north? And that's the stress of today's psalm. The question really happens in our lives as well. There's whole areas of our life that we think are pretty well contained and safe, where we say to God, I got this, I got this, I got this. And then you move off to do something that's outside of that box and say, God, I need your help here. And you forgot to say, God, I also need you to maintain this. Because after all, you don't got this. God gave this to you. The stability you have is something that God builds. And many times we get distracted to the new things, and the new things bring threat or stress or whatever they're all about. And we say, that's a natural thing for us to say, God, help me here. And what we should be saying all along is, God, maintain everything you've given me. And that's what David forgets to do right here. That's what he forgets to do. So let's finish the narrative and we'll go to the psalm. He put garrisons in Edom after he won. In all Edom, he put garrisons. Again, those are warning stations, and they're ways in which soldiers can say, don't invade us anymore. And all the Edomites became servants to David. So they became friendlies as a result. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. It says this twice in this section. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and righteousness for his people. Tired with the history yet? Let's read a song. What would he write? Remember, here's what the heading says. It's a teaching song. When he struggled with Aram Naharim, we don't know who Naharim is, but we know what Aram is. It's those people to the northeast, right? And with Aram Zobah. We know Zobah, and they're Aramites. See? Makes sense now. Makes a whole lot of sense. Joab, 4-star general, returns and smote 12,000 of Edom in the Valley of Salt. That makes sense as well. So this is what he's saying. In this one particular militaristic song, he wrote this when all of a sudden everything fell apart in the south. And he had to send Joab, his chief general, down there to try and plug the leak and hope that at the end of all that, the nation of Israel would still exist. But it might not. David might have been foolish going north. So what do you do and what do you say? So this is what David writes in the middle of all of this. It's about David when he struggled with those guys, and it's all to teach us so you don't make the mistake again, which is why they used to sing this in militaristic training. Don't ever make this mistake ever again. Here's the psalm. Psalm 60 is split into 3 verses, and we'll start with the first verse, which starts in verse 1 through 3. So here we go. He starts out, "Oh God, you have rejected us. You have broken us. You've been angry. Oh, restore us. You've made the land quake. You have split it open. Heal its breaches, for it totters. You have made your people experience hardship. You have given us wine to drink that makes us stagger." Now, in the face of all those military triumphs in the north, what David focuses on here was the breach in the south. And he's saying, God, you allowed them to come through this breach. It's like an earthquake of soldiers have come in. And the news to us is so staggering, it's like when we've been drinking too much at night and we can barely walk around. That's how staggered we are by the news of the fact that our classic enemies have come in from the south, and while we've been gone, they're going to eat our nation alive. You've allowed this. You've made the land quake. It's like an earthquake. It's like it's split open, and the splitting open has brought breaches, and it totters, and the world, everything's just falling apart. God, have you rejected us? Are you breaking us? Are you angry with us? Would you restore us? So this is the stress that's in David's heart. It's not about the successes of Hadadezer. It's not about the successes over in the incredible walled city of Damascus. It's about the fact that they were sleeping on the job and they forgot that Edom would come and take them over. And with almost no resources to get down there fast enough, God, will you save us? Will you restore us? But you notice in the sound of his voice, he's saying that this is something that God has deliberately let them experience. Do you see that in how he says it? This is not an accident. This is not something where God was asleep at the wall and all of a sudden the Edomites woke up and God says, oh, hey, where'd the Edomites come from? No. This is something that God has allowed to happen, allowed to humble David, allowed to humble their military, and allowed them to realize that even though things look like they're just fine, God still needs to be asked to hold the breaches, to keep back these things. God's the one that not only brings peace to your life, he's the one that holds off the things that threaten that peace. And the minute that you say, got it covered, God says, you never did. I gave that to you, and you need to continue to come to me to ask to preserve that. Peace is an unnatural state for those who follow God. It's unnatural in the sense that God supernaturally makes it happen. Jesus says, peace I give to you. It's not like peace that the world has. It's an extraordinary kind of peace. It's something that they'll never understand. This world that we live in that's fallen is a place of conflict and problems, no end. And if there is peace in your life, thank God, because he brought it and he maintains it. And that's what we're learning about right here. So God allows a little bit of unpeace to come into their life so that David will go back to remember that as king, he not only has to rely on God for his new battles, he has to rely on God to preserve the old battles. And there's a ton of theology in that for us, a ton of it. If you wake up from day to day and you say, God, nothing threatens my thinking. Everything's put together just right. Everything, for once, as I wake up today, everything seems calm and collected. If you don't move immediately to, and God, that's your doing, then you're not understanding how unnatural this situation is, that the world is not bugging you today. It's something that the Lord brings to you and preserves for you, and that you need to continually thank him for. So in the periods of time where there is not new conflict, take up your time thanking him for that. And, we went through some tremendous conflicts a couple years ago, and even last year as we almost lost our building. All these conflicts come up, and you say to yourself, when am I going to wake up some morning and not have some gigantic conflict that wakes me up at 3 a.m? I always wake up at 3. I don't know why. When's that going to happen? When's there going to be peace? And I go to God and say, God, when is there going to be peace? But then when the peace comes, I forget to say, this is all you're doing. Thank you for this. So instead of just saying everything's fine today, I'll go off and do what I ever want to do, and there's some of that you can do, just make sure that you look around at the peace that you're enjoying and say, God, this is you. You did this. And it's not the world, and it's not because I'm so good. Because as soon as you start to think it's because you're so good, God says, let's open the breaches. Just to remind you that he brings peace and he preserves peace. And this is his promise to the nation of Israel as well as to us. This is his promise. God says, if you'll be my people, I will be your God. And what that means when I say I will be your God is he says, I will protect your borders. I'll keep the bad guys out. I'll bring peace that way. I'll protect you from pestilence and drought and disease. I'll bring peace that way. And he goes down this whole list about what to do. I'll provide for you when the plants grow and you have plenty of grain. You won't be stressed out about that. I'll bring peace in every way you can think of because you're my people and I'm your God. And as soon in the nation of Israel, we're talking mid to late Old Testament, start to forget that, God opens the breaches so that they'll remember. And then he brings them back. So God is really not above opening the breaches in our life when we start to forget that the peace is an active job on God's part in your life, not the outcome of you being so smart. Because when you get there, oh my gosh, you're in big trouble. So that's exactly what's going on here. David's thinking, I'm pretty hot stuff. I understood Hadadezer went up to Euphrates. I can attack him from the south. Pretty cool strategy. This will work out really great. Everything does work out great. And yet he succumbs to the same strategy from Edomites. Oh Lord, you've broken us. Okay, restore us, would you? We forgot. That's verse 1 of the song. Verse 2 of the song. I'm sorry. I forgot this part. That'll come up in just a second. Verse 4 of the first verse. You've given a banner to those who fear you, that it may be displayed because of the truth. Selah. Selah always means dramatic musical pause. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, in fact, that's what I hear in my head when I read Selah. I hear dun, dun, dun. What is he saying? You've given a banner to those who fear you. Well, what's a banner in a military fight? Remember those guys on the horses, and they got that big standard, on the flag? What does it usually say on the flag? What's that? Identity, who they are. We represent the king of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what it says. Or we're, the 4th Battalion or stuff like that. That's just for military use. But the banner says, we are the ones who serve this one right here. So in a sense, what he's saying is that God has given a banner to fly over our heads. If we fear him, if God is our God, if we're his people and his God, he's got a banner flying over us, even in the middle of all these things. If you think back in the Old Testament, there's 2 other places you hear banners. This one, Exodus 17:15. Remember when Moses is in the battle and the guys have to hold his arms up, and as long as his arms are up in the air, Remember that? Battle goes good. And when his arms aren't in the air, battle goes bad. And one of the key military leaders on the battlefield who are watching people die when Moses' arms go down is none other than Joshua himself. He remembers this years later. And what Moses says, his arms is in the air, in a sense, he's saying, the Lord is my banner. He's the one that's over me in the fight. There's another even more famous banner. Song of Solomon 2:4. Remember the banquet table? Call me to his banqueting table. And his banner over me is love. So the flag that flies over our conflicts and problems in life is actually the near presence of God and his love on our behalf. And that changes everything in the conflict. I mean, imagine you're on a horse and you're riding in this battle and the banner over you says, love of God. Oh. And then people look at you who want to take you down and say, well, I don't have to fight you. I guess I have to fight your God because he loves you. And that's exactly the idea that's coming from this whole military idea. His banner over me is love. Well, he's given a banner to me and it flies over my head that it may be displayed because of the truth. It's a clumsy translation. And actually, the Hebrew translators wrestle with this line. That it may be displayed, that's very clear. So what he's saying is that the banner flies over your head, that is God's near presence and his love for you. It wants to be seen. It's not a hidden banner. It needs to be seen by yourselves and as well as your enemies. It needs to be seen. But what is this? Because of the truth? Well, this might help a little bit. Because of the truth is literally in the face of the balance. This isn't getting any easier. Well, because of face, you need to face the facts. Have you ever heard anyone say that? You need to come right like that, face the fact. That's exactly what this word means. So the banner's there so people will face something. And what will they face? What they'll face is the balance of the truth. Paul Harvey used to say, and now for the rest of the story. And that's exactly what this word means. It means this is what you see on the battlefield, but there's more than you can see on the battlefield than soldiers and horses. There's more to this story. The balance of the story is what? God's nearness and presence and his love for us. So literally what it's saying is that here's this banner who flies over your head for the purposes of telling all the people who are with you and all the people who are against you that the nearness of God is here and you need to face that, and that's the truth that you can't see in this battle. That's the balance of the truth, the God who loves these people. So it's an elegant Hebrew phrase. This banner, God flies over our heads so it'll be displayed so people will face the rest of the story, which is God's loving kindness to these people. And that's the banner that flies over our head. What's literally the banner say right here? He tells us in the next verse. This banner here says that your beloved may be delivered. Save with your right hand and answer us. So who does God engage on the behalf of? His beloved. So this is exactly what this banner says, beloved. Flies over our head, and anyone who wishes to take us down or attack us, or even when we're in the depths of despair and think it's just not going to get any better, don't ever forget that in the conflict, you are beloved. And you know, when you're in conflict and crisis, that changes everything, doesn't it? I almost want to make my own banner and put it on a stick and walk around with it and say, beloved, beloved, beloved. Who can separate you from the love of Christ? Nothing. And Paul tells us that. Nothing can. And that's the banner that flies over our head in the midst of those conflicts. Those very same conflicts that you look at and you say, I'm going to die. Right? Now, don't laugh. I do this too. Because we talk about this a lot. In these kind of crises, it's very easy to translate the threat to the repercussions in our life. I mean, in fact, when you wake up at 3 a.m, that's all you can think of. This could happen, and then this could happen, and this could happen, and we're all going to die. You know, it gets worse. It's very easy to make that list. But when you remember that flying over your head is a banner that God placed there that says, beloved. Well, then the crisis doesn't quite look as big as it is, really. And that's what David's learning in the midst of this. Flying over your head is this banner that reminds you that you are beloved. You are beloved. His banner over me is love. And in Moses' case, the Lord is my banner. He's over me. And that completely changes the entire outlook of every crisis. everything that you're up against that looks like it threatens to take down your entire world. Because God has said to you, beloved. Okay, verse 2. God has spoken in his holiness and said, I will exalt, I will portion out Shechem and measure out the valley of Sukkot. Let me read all of these for a second. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim also is the helmet of my head, Judah is my scepter, Moab is my washbowl, over Edom I shall throw my shoe, shout loud, O Philistia, because of me. That's the entire second verse, and I'll tell you, that's weird. But let's back off for a second. A lot of the names are unfamiliar to you. I will exalt. God, that means God's going to celebrate. I will portion out Shechem and measure out the valley of Sukkot. If you went to the very center of Israel, I mean the very geometric center of Israel, and you go just west of the Jordan River, you hit Shechem. It's as close as you can get to the heart of the country. And then if you go a little bit to the west over the Jordan River to the right side, you get Sukkot. They're like right there. They're like the twin center of the entire country. So what God is saying is that the very heart of the country, I have already portioned out. I've already divided it and given it to you as people of the nation of Israel. It's already yours. The very heart of the country is yours, and I gave it to you, which is a way of God saying, I'll never let anyone take it from you. And this is what David is remembering before he comes down to fight in the Valley of Salt. God has given us the heart of this country. He's not going to allow it to fall now. He's given it to us. He's portioned out Shechem, Sukkot, right in the center. Gilead is mine. You know where Gilead is? It's everything on the western edge of the Jordan River. Okay? The area, by the way, that most of the action's been taking place with Edom and Moab and even the Aramites. They're all east of the Jordan River. So what he's saying is that these are the tribes. These are the tribes of Israel. Manasseh is a tribe that's over in that area of Gilead. Ephraim also is the helmet of my head. Judah is my scepter. Manasseh is over there. So what he's saying is that all the places where you've had problems, I've already decided who owns that land, and it's you. It's you. So you don't have to sit and obsess about whether or not the Edomites are going to come in and take it, because I've already apportioned it to you guys. I've given it to you. He says, Ephraim is the helmet of my head. A lot of debate about exactly what that means, but we'll just let that stay there. But the second one is actually really well known. Judah is my scepter. Judah is my scepter. Remember, out of the 12 tribes of Israel, the Messiah was going to come out of one of those 12 tribes. And it came out of the tribe of Judah. The scepter is something the king has. In fact, it literally says, I don't know which English version you use, but it says that Judah is my lawgiver. It'll say that in some versions. Or my governor in that sense. It literally says Judah is the one who inscribes on stone, chips away stone. And when you made laws, you chipped them into stone. So they're kind of the lawgiver. They're the ones who are in charge. They're the ones that get to make the rules in that sense. Well, out of Judah comes one who gets to make the rules. That's the Messiah, and that's Jesus. He uses that same term in another place. I'm going to get the verse wrong. I think it's in Isaiah 48 or 49 where God says, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands. Is that 49? So you can check up. But it's the same word. It means to chip indelibly. You can't erase this. Once you chip this in stone, it's there. And guess what? Your names are written. They're engraved and can't be erased on the palms of God. Well, Judah is the scepter. He's the one who gets to chip the laws in the stone. He's the one that the Messiah comes out of. So God is saying up here in verse 6 and 7, the nation of Israel is really not at risk because I'm the one who apportioned who it goes to and who gets to live where. Don't fret it. I gave it to you. I'll preserve it. So you're okay. You're okay. And in fact, remember those troublemakers, Moab and Edom and the Philistines? You know what I think of them? Well, Moab is my washbowl. There's a lot of rich poetry of what these things mean. There was, in fact, I found out that the king of Persia used to have a guy, a servant who would follow him around when he would travel or when he was in battle. It was called the Tashat Dar, and the only reason I remember it is because in Star Trek there's Tasha Yar, and I've always remembered this. But yeah, Tashat Dar was the name of a servant who would follow around the Persian king when he was either in battle or traveling for other purposes. And all he did was bring a wash bowl around for the king to wash his hands. So everywhere the king went, he had this wash bowl he would carry on it. And he was there just to kind of keep him clean all the time. And God's saying, that's what Moab is. He's this little useless servant that runs around with a bowl of water anywhere I go. Servant, I'm dirty. That's Moab. That's what I think of Moab. And over Edom, I throw my shoe. Throw my shoe? And at this point, you should be getting the clue that maybe we have a cultural problem when you read that, because that doesn't mean I was going to take my shoe off and throw it this morning and demonstrate how useless that is. But actually, President Bush was in a press conference. Remember that? Yeah. And some guy took off his shoe and threw it. It's exactly the same meaning as this. And what it means is the shoe in ancient culture had several meanings actually. But one of them, and to this very day in Arab culture, it's I can't say the phrase for you, but there's this thing that if your enemy is introduced to you nearby, like this is your enemy, he's right there, then what you do is you take off your shoe and you throw it at him and you say, "My shoe be upon your head," in Arab. And that's what this guy was doing because he spotted Bush as being his enemy in close proximity, and basically he throws his shoe at him to declare war on him. In ancient English culture, what we would do is we would take out our gloves. Doom, doom, doom. Not in their culture, you chuck your shoe at them. That's what you do. The shoe, and the shoe has a lot of symbolism in the Oriental cultures back there. If you walked on a piece of ground, that was your way of saying, "I own this." So really, your shoe was your way of marking your legal ownership of something. Staking your claim is what we used here. When you had the land rush, early part of our country, staking a claim by putting a stake in. No. All you had to do there was walk the land, and that was yours. So really, it was a way of saying that if I put my shoe on you, I'm staking my claim on you. I own you. So that's one way. That's why the shoe on someone's head says, "I'm going to own you pretty soon." Makes sense, doesn't it? Also, if you remember back to the story of Ruth. Remember the story of Ruth? A great, great story after Judges. And there's this dispute about whether or not Ruth and Naomi, whether she can marry or not. It depends on whether or not she's got any prior claim from another man. Remember that? And in the dispute, it gets settled when he takes his shoe off and puts it on the table, takes his sandal off, saying, "I have no claim on her legally." And also the shoe had the intention of being dirty. Remember in the New Testament times, you'd go to a meal and you take your shoes off and they'd wash your feet. Well, the sandal was the dirtiest part of it. You'd leave that behind and then you just wash your bare feet. But the sandal is very dirty. So really, it's also a sign of dirtiness as well. The sandal's a dirty thing. So you take all that symbolism and you throw it together. Oh, by the way, remember when Moses is at the burning bush and God says, "Take your shoes off because the ground is holy"? What's he saying? Well, in actually 3 different ways, he's saying, number one, you can't walk here and own this ground. It's my ground. Take your shoes off. Also, your shoes are dirty and profane. I'm clean. Take your shoes off. And you will never conquer what I'm going to give you because I'm going to give it to you. Take your shoes off. So all that meaning is kind of wrapped up in all this shoe stuff. So back to this. Over Edom, I throw my shoe. What? Well, there's lots of meaning in this, and we don't have time to really unpack it because it's not really that much worth it. But in a way, what he's saying is that Edom is actually, it's not concentrated into city-states like a lot of the other kingdoms were. Edom is just a hugely geographic dispersed area. How do you conquer Edom? There's too many of them. They're too widely dispersed. You can't go in there and take them down a city-state at a time. They're just everywhere. The Edomites are everywhere. And God says, no big deal. Instead of actually boots on the ground on you, I'll just take my boot and chuck it over you, and you're mine. It's exactly what he's saying. Edom isn't too big that I can't chuck my boot across it, and I own you, Edom. Sure, you might be distributed. Sure, you might be hard to kind of grab hold of, but I got you. I just take my shoe and chuck it over you. And another way, he's saying another thing, too, that when problems happen around that area from other dangers to Israel, and God spots them at a distance over your head, Edom, I'm not even going to worry about you guys. I'm going to take my shoe and chuck it at those guys from a distance. Because you're inconsequential, Edom. That's how inconsequential you are. Whew. That's enough culture for the day. So that's what he thinks of Edom. And shout loud, O Philistia, because of me. The shout loud is this word that actually literally means to split something in half. Ear splitting, literally. Ear splitting sound. So they realize how conquered they are, and the only thing they can do instead of coming back with a great military comeback is just to shout at the top of their lungs in defeat. Ah! That's what it means. So Philistia, all you can do is just shout. And why? Because of me, the one who defends Israel. They're my people. I'm their God. Moab, just an inconsequential servant. Edom, I chucked my shoe over you. It's like going like this in ancient Egypt. I chucked my shoe over you. And Philistines, all you guys got left is to scream. That's all you got left because of me. It's very poetic. God has just put them all down. So the real danger to Israel from this Edomite invasion in the south, in this center verse, is zero. There is no fear because God takes care of these guys at the right time. That's what he's saying, very, very poetically. And now let's get to the third verse, third and last verse, verse 9 of chapter of Psalm 60. So who will bring me into the besieged city? Who will lead me to Edom? So this is the challenge to the new military people in Israel. So who will bring you into the besieged city? Think Jericho. Perfect idea. Big old walls, impenetrable from every way, shape, and form. Who will take me into the besieged city? Which, by the way, is backwards, because when you besiege a city, you wait for them to get so hungry that they come out. That's how you do besieges. But he says, no, that's not us. The city will be besieged, but who will lead me into the besieged city? Which is actually a suicide tactic for besieged cities. It's suicide. But who will lead me there? The answer is God. In fact, in this particular case, in this particular history, maybe Hamath itself was that besieged city that God took them into. But they didn't have to because Hamath decided to just give up. Who will lead me to Edom? That is the Valley of Salt. Who will take me there? Who will take me to the dangerous enemies of our country who aren't in a tight little concentrated city, but they're everywhere? Ah! How do you take over Edom? They're everywhere. You squash them over here, they come up over there. You squash them over there. You know, it's like that Gopher game. You know, you just can't quite get your hands around Edom because they're everywhere. What's that? Whack-a-mole. Yeah, whack-a-mole. That's whack-a-mole. That's Edom. So how are you supposed to take them over? He's saying rhetorically, who will do that? Who will lead me to Edom? Who will lead me to give me the strategy to do this distributed thing? And the answer again, rhetorically, is God himself. He's the one that does that. He's the one that did that here. Have not you yourself, O God, rejected us? Better translated, if it weren't for you, God, then, but for you, God, we would be rejected, is how that says it. And will you not, but for the grace of God. And will you not go forth with our armies, O God? So who is the one who will reject us? Not God. Who is the one who goes forth with our armies? God. That's what every draftee into the military in Israel at that time had to sing in song. It's not by might, not by power. God will not reject us. He's the one that goes ahead of us. He's the one that gives us strategies for impossible military assaults like siege cities. He's the one that leads us when we're after someone who's so slippery like the Edomites, you just can't find them. They're everywhere. He's the one that leads us. If it weren't for God, then we as a military would be worthless. That's what he's saying right here. And that's what they would sing. It's all about God. He's the one that goes forth with our armies. Oh, give us help against the adversary, for deliverance by man is vain. Through God we shall do valiantly, and it is he who will tread down our adversaries. He's the one that will put his shoe on the adversaries, not us. So this is the closing refrain from the military recruits. They sing this. It's not about our power. We ask him to give us help against our adversaries, because if we try and deliver ourselves by our own power, it's vain. We won't get there. And this is a theme throughout all of the people who love and fear God, is that God is on their side. That God's the one who's engaging on their behalf. And it's not about you doing enough, and then God does something on top of that. They start out from the very get-go and say, it's all God. It's all God. Because to do it on my own is vain. It just won't work. Just won't work. Through God, we do valiantly. It's he who puts his boot on our adversary's head. And he chucks his shoe across Edom.
Is there a parallel where Jesus puts
Yeah, the parallel when Jesus puts the devil under his foot. Anytime you see that, put your foot on the neck of or on the head of, you vanquish them. That, by the way, is why in ancient times in the throne room where the king was always higher, so that the vanquished ones would come in and he could use their head as a footstool. Yeah. Okay, to wrap this up, I don't know if you knew this, but there's a cover song in Psalms. There's a cover of this song. It's in Psalm 108. Yeah. It has a different verse 1 and exactly the same verse 2 and verse 3. So I just want to read you what they swapped in for verse 1 differently in this cover song over in Psalm 108, and we'll quit with this. When someone covers someone else's song? Not a parody. That's actually a respectful redo. It's a remix.
I don't mean parody in
Yeah, not disrespectful. But yeah.
same song, but just different.
Same song with a slight switch. And here's the slight switch in verse 1. And we'll just finish with this. Because what he replaced in verse 1, remember how bummed out verse 1 was in Psalm 60? You know, have you rejected us? The breaches have opened. It's all falling apart. We're all going to die, right? Here's what he replaces with. First verse. My heart is steadfast, O God. I will sing praises even with my soul. Awake, harp and lyre, I will awaken the dawn. And we've seen this language before. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples, and I will sing praises to you among the nations, not just among his own people, but amongst the entire world. I sing praises for this God. And he finishes the first verse like this. For your loving kindness is great above the heavens. We've seen this before. Yeah. His chesed, his devoted love to us is great. So great, it's bigger than the universe. It's above the heavens. Your truth reaches to the skies. That is the reality of who you are and how you engage on our behalf. Your truth reaches to the skies. So be exalted, lifted up, O God, above the heavens, and your glory above all the earth, that your beloved may be delivered. Save with your right hand and answer me. Oh, oh. And that was a good military song to sing as well. Because we are his beloved. And that changes the entire picture in the conflict. We are his beloved. And his loving kindness, his chesed, his devoted love to us is bigger than the entire universe. So the next time a crisis knocks on your door, right, and you open the door and you realize that we're all going to die, and I'm being a little facetious here, but you know what I'm talking about. Crises come through life just like this. Peace, crisis, peace, crisis, peace, crisis. Well, the next time, not if, the next time that happens, you need to open the door, stare the crisis in the eyes, and remember that flying over your head is a banner that says, Beloved. And you take it to God, and you say, God, will you engage on my behalf? Will your loving kindness, your devotion toward me, your chesed for me, will you engage it right now? And in the midst of face-to-face with this threat, I'll be your people. You'll be my God. It changes everything. It changes everything. The Bible is not a book to give you clues about how to live life necessarily, how to defeat crises as they come, like a lot of self-help philosophies are in the world. The Bible is a book to tell us that we are his beloved and he will engage on our behalf. That's a radically different thing. And because of that, Jesus says, I give you peace that the world will never understand. Ever. Ever. So in this first of the Psalms that David writes out of the context of him being king, he cements for himself as well as entire nation of soldiers that every battle from here on out is not going to turn based on our skill or our power or the number of horses we have. It'll turn based on our understanding that we are his beloved. And he fights our fight. Something's very unnerving when you're singing about the fact that you are going to win in the midst of the conflict. Because, not because you're smart or strong, but because I'm God's beloved. Way different kind of thing. And so it got turned into a song that we used all the time in Israel, the very beginning of David's reign. Well, let's us sing a song. That was written by David. Yep. Yep, that was written by David. Okay, let's pray. Father, we thank you for that banner that flies over our head, that banner that says we are your beloved, You yourself are our banner, as Moses says. The Lord's my banner that flies over me. And Lord, we can say this now, but when the next crisis knocks on the front door, that whole thought goes out the back door. And we are easily shaken by the events of life. Myself included, Lord, I admit. We're easily shaken. And Lord, I don't think we'll ever be as shaken as David was when the Edomites started to eat up his country from the south. But Lord, there are so many things that threaten us, that threaten to take us down. And we are so quick to forget that we are your beloved. And we are quick to believe that we are your abandoned and not your beloved. So Lord, I pray that you would through your Spirit remind us that Satan really has no power in those situations. James says if you resist the devil, he'll flee. And that really in reality, the battle is all done through Christ and through his death on the cross. All that victory is done and complete. And we're just in the mopping up operation. The victory is ours. Not because we're smart or strong, but because Christ died and defeated the principalities and the powers that rage against us. So Lord, I pray you'd continue to remind us that there's a stick coming out of the back of our head with a flag that flies over our heads, and on that is inscribed by your very hand, beloved. And because of that, nothing can separate us from the love of God. So we thank you for this reminder, and make it a song in our heart as we walk through the repeated trials and conflicts that come our way. You are so loving to us, and your deliverance to us is astonishing, and we understand day by day that nothing can separate us from your love. So thank you for the peace of that knowledge, the peace of facing the balance of that truth in our lives. So thanks for this now in Jesus' name. Amen.